In 1988, a young woman set out alone to explore one of her favorite places, a vast national park filled with winding trails and towering trees. She never came home. For more than 2 decades, her disappearance remained a haunting mystery. Then, 24 years later, a routine evening in the park took an unexpected turn. A thermal camera picked up something high in the canopy, something no one could explain at first glance. What was it doing there, and could it be the key to unlocking a decades-old secret? Morning in Mariposa began the way June Whitaker loved. Small sounds that opened the day like a trail. The kettle ticked. Coffee dripped into a chipped mug. Sun warmed the table and a stack of folded maps. June laced her boots, tied her neat double knot 2 turns, a tuck, a pat, and smiled at how the boughs sat ready as if they also wished to wander. Her mother, Linda, came in with a sweater over her nightshirt. Up before the birds again? They beat me, June said, tapping the field notebook that never left her pocket. Scrub jay at dawn. Which path today? Vernal fall, maybe the footbridge if the crowd is kind. I want sunlight through spray. June lifted her red backpack and checked what she called her quiet kit. A spool of cord, a pencil wrapped in tape, a square of treated cloth for sunprints, clothespins. If the light behaves, I'll make leaf prints by the river. Back. For dinner, Linda said, using a laugh to brace a worry. I'll be back before the pan gets hot. June kissed her cheek. You always oversalt the potatoes when I'm late. At least they're edible. Linda hugged her longer than she meant to. The truck coughed and settled as June headed out. Mariposa rolled past Barber's shop diner. A dress in a window that never sold. Oaks gave way to pines. The valley opened like a held breath. She remembered school trips, shifts at the coffee cart by the trailhead, afternoons picnicking with her mother while the river talked happy. Aisles she swung on the red pack. There she is, called Walt Hennessy from the bench by the kiosk. Retired ranger, 2 fingers missing on his left hand, a man who could read a hillside like a book. Morning, Walt. June offered her wrist. He tugged at the leather bracelet. She had braided with tiny knots and 3 colored beads. You change this thing every week, he said. It tells a different story every week, she said. Today it says go easy and look up. Stones get slick by vernal, he warned. Folks stare at the water and forget their feet. I'll watch both. Tourists drifted by. A boy stared at her pack. Want to see a trick? She asked. She knelt, pressed a leaf to her treated cloth, pinned it, and counted softly. After a minute, she rinsed it with a splash from her canteen. A pale outline bloomed. The boy beamed in. The tiny store, she bought 2 hand warmers, more out of habit than need. For the moments when patience is colder than the air, she liked to say. She slipped them into a side pocket and started up the mist trail. Her notebook caught the day in short lines. Date, temperature, raven, warbler, jay. Her handwriting leaned uphill like her stride. She breathed sap, dust, and the faint metal smell of wet granite. She listened for the hush under louder sounds and let the path welcome her like an old friend. At Vernal Fall footbridge, the water ran white and fast. A family asked for a photo. She obliged and teased the grandmother to tilt her hat like a movie star. When they moved on, June sketched the curve of the rail, then noticed 3 shallow scars on a nearby trunk, trident-shaped, as if old gear had once kissed the bark. She filed the detail and kept walking. By afternoon, the light grew honey-thick. June stepped off the main route to a side path she knew, where bay leaves crushed underfoot and the rush of water was steady and kind. She made another sunprint with a fern. The outline came so clean she laughed. The park was her home, she wrote, and home was a place that asked only attention. Back in town, the hours ran on. Linda folded towels, then unfolded and folded again. She wiped a counter that was already clean. At 4, she set a pie on the counter, as if dessert could summon a daughter. At 5, she called the coffee cart to ask if anyone had seen June. At 6, she cracked the kitchen window to hear tires on. Gravel. At 7, she lifted the phone and set it down. She told herself that a person who watched fish in the river was always late to dinner. She told herself that a person who carried a bird list forgot the clock when the list grew long. None of it settled her heart. At 8, she called the sheriff. "It's probably nothing," she began, and her voice broke on the word. Rangers checked radios. Static came and went like wind over fence wire. Volunteers arrived with headlamps and calm voices. Linda drove to the park entrance and waited under the lamp. Deputy Hank Boone pulled in, sneezed once, then again. "Pollen?" a volunteer asked. "Wish it were," Boone said, rubbing his neck. "Bee found me on the way in. Bees like me. I do not return the feeling." He listened, asked for a recent photo, promised the simple checks first. Trailheads, turnarounds, overlooks where people lose track of minutes. He tried a small joke. "If she's measuring sunlight, the park owes her rent." Linda managed a thin smile. Night deepened. Searchers called June's name at a steady rhythm so Dredd could not sprint ahead. Walt stayed by the parking area in case she wandered out on a different path. He kept glancing up the trail, expecting a red strap and a quick wave. Lost track of time. "I'm here." Midnight leaned on the valley. The river kept its own story and did not share. Radios crackled with news that felt large and then went small. A dropped scarf, a footprint not hers, a glint that looked like fabric and turned out to be water shouldering stone. By dawn, the grid widened. Linda made coffee for searchers because doing something kept hands from shaking. Boone sneezed again and scowled at the sting. He promised to call as soon as he had anything. He walked away with that careful gait some people learn from this work. Days learned to start without June. Posters went up. Linda forgot to salt the potatoes. Once she forgot to cook them. The house kept quiet. No one saw the red backpack. Number 1 thought to look where no one would put such a thing. Years turned. Hope folded and unfolded until its creases became borders. People married, left, returned with children who asked who the girl in the photo was. "Someone we loved," the town said. 20-4 years later, autumn again. 2 visitors walked Cascade Creek Trail at dusk with a small heat-reading device, hoping to count owls. The screen in their hands showed cool woods in blues and purples, warm things in yellow and orange. They swept the slope and understory, then tilted the device toward the high canopy. Wind moved in the crowns, and needles hissed like rain while dusk held its breath. Calm, near the crown of a tall pine, a shape burned bright, as if it held its own small sun. The 2 of them stopped breathing at once. One raised a hand as if to steady the picture, though nothing around them moved. There, against the cold blue of branches and sky, was a tight oval with straps trailing, the size of a pack someone would sling over one shoulder without thinking. Their voices dropped without meaning to. A whisper threaded the hush. "Is that June's backpack?" The question hung in the trees and did not fall. Word reached the ranger station in minutes. Elena Park stepped out with a coil of cord in her hand, the way some people carry a pen. She listened, eyes on the line of pines as if they could answer. "Back." Deputy Hank Boone arrived behind her, still rubbing at a sting on his neck. "Please tell me the forest has a leash for bees," he said, half a wince, half a grin. Elena nodded to the 2 visitors who had spotted the heat shape. "You did the right thing," she told them. "We'll take it from here." They set a quiet circle around the base of the tall pine with tape and calm words. Walt Hennessy ambled up, hat low, hands in the pockets of a faded jacket. "If the wind turns, I'd hang back," he said, looking at the height. "That's an old crown." Boone, full of zeal, produced a tiny hobby drone from his trunk, a contraption that looked brave until it left the ground. "Scout first, climb second," he announced. The thing went up wobbling, drew a neat line, and immediately drew a furious yellow dot that came from nowhere. Boone backed away, swatting. The drone jittered in panic and lodged itself in a branch 10 feet up. The bee stayed interested in Boone. "Nature says no," Elena murmured. Walt coughed to hide a laugh. Elena chose the path that never argued with physics. She used a throw bag to send a thin pilot line over a lower branch, then walked the line down and replaced it with something that would hold weight. The high work would come from a professional arborist, but for now they could coax the object down with care and gravity. Walt watched her hands. "You were taught right," he said. The pack resisted the first pull, then turned on itself the way a stubborn knot loosens, and at last eased down. It reached their hands light but not empty. Its red sun faded into the color of dusk. Straps were rough with age. A little burr of sap clung where fabric had pressed bark for years. The zipper teeth were dulled like stones washed long. Walt felt along the seams and frowned. Something nested in there. He tapped the side gently. A ringtail peered out, barred tail flicking with insult, then slipped away into the understory. The warmth that made strangers gasp had been a family's borrowed furnace. Elena laid the pack on a clean tarp. "June Whitaker," she said, not asking. Boone swallowed. The two visitors stood back, hats in their hands. They worked slow. Air came up from the open zipper with the smell of leaf mold and old metal. Inside lay June's care and craft, the way a person leaves fingerprints without touching anything. The first thing was a small stack of blue, papers the color of shallow water sunprints. Cyanotypes of leaves, ferns, pine. White veins ghosted on blue. Near the corners, Elena saw tiny pinholes, so small they only made sense when you wanted them to. "These weren't just pretty," she said. Next was a leather bracelet braided by a steady hand, threaded with knots and 3 tiny beads, amber, black, amber repeating. Walt ran his thumb along them. "Clove hitch, half hitch, figure 8, he said, naming old friends. "Not just jewelry." A palm-sized pulley rattled against a short strap of flat webbing. The metal wore a smear of blue grease that refused. The wipe. Boone sniffed and made a face. "Smells like mechanics' hands," he said. The strap felt like slackline tape, scuffed. Not new, when it went into the pack. There was a matchbook from a place called the Blue Lantern Motel. The little drawing on the cover showed a lantern with bright beams. 4 sticks were gone. 3 remained, each notched by a careful blade. On the inside flap, someone had scratched an arrow pointing up and the letters NNE. 3 lines next to it stood like tally marks. 3. Last came a striped owl feather with a thin metal band around its shaft. Numbers were stamped into the band, but the series didn't look like anything in Elena's head. "Official bands from our program start with a different block," she said quietly. "This doesn't." Boone gathered the empty hand warmer. Wrappers with a soft sound that might have been respect. "She planned for cold hands," he said. They moved to a picnic table under shade to look without hurry. Elena set a park brochure flat, the sort given to every family who asked where to see water and avoid steep things. When she laid the cyanotypes over it, the pinholes meant nothing on their own but something together, with the brochure as a dare. Base, the holes made a chain of little points along the El Portal Road, as if someone had lifted locations out of the map with a needle. Near the Vernal Fall footbridge, the holes made 3 marks that looked like a trident. Elena held her breath. The way you do when a shape you did not expect steps out of the brush. Walt squinted and whistled low. "She was making a map folk wouldn't rip off a board and pocket," he said. "A map you have to know how to read." Boone tapped the matchbook. "Blue Lantern Motel," he read aloud. "I remember the sign. Closed for years. Arrow up. NNE and 3. 3 what? 3 something," Elena said. 3 pulls, 3 climbs, 3 turns. She slid the bracelet close. 3 beads, too. "Rory Pike supplies rope and fittings to maintenance," Boone said, thinking out loud. If someone had these pulleys in bulk, it was him. "And Greta Salazar runs night owl walks for volunteers," Walt added. She likes to collect little bands and numbers, talks about birds like they're cousins. Elena noted the names, though notes were already in her head. Evan Morales, June's ex, belonged on any early list because the past can pull wrong when it hurts. Walt himself belonged on the list because fairness is a door that swings both ways. They went back to the site with daylight, still workable. Boone walked a patient grid beneath the pines, eyes not on the ground but up. "If you hung anything once," he said, "you hung it where you could do it again." On the far side of the slope he found a trunk with shallow wounds, 3 crescent. Scars near shoulder height, a ghost of metal having been placed there long ago. He rubbed the dry curve with his thumb and brought away a wisper of blue. He showed it to Elena with a raised brow. "Zipline," she said. The word felt out of place on a footpath. She looked toward the water, then to the place where the blue holes had aligned like stepping stones on paper. The day stood very still. They spent the afternoon talking to people who had lived long in the valley. An old mechanic remembered selling a case of blue grease to a man who liked everything clean except his conscience. He couldn't say if it had been Rory. A clerk remembered Greta smelling like cedar and being fierce about owls. "She takes numbers like prayer," the clerk said. Evan answered his phone with a shaky hello and then steadied. He said he had begged June not to hike alone that summer. He said he loved her stubbornness and hated it in equal measure. He sounded like a person trying to be both witness and alibi to his own heart. As light thinned, the forest changed voices. Day birds went quiet and night ones tested the air. Elena followed the trident on the Shanadipe to the actual rail near Vernal Fall, to a place where water threw mist into the last gold. She knelt by a dark seam in rock and felt the lip of a narrow cavity hidden by roots. Inside, her fingers found the clean arc of something scored into stone many years ago, a ring where a pulley could sit. The smell of old metal rose like a memory. She worked the tip of her knife into the pocket and levered gently. A small object rolled into her palm, dense and cold and slick with a faint, stubborn smear that stained her skin blue. She turned it to the light. The groove where cord would run was worn smooth. The blue on the side shone the way oil does when it thinks no one is looking. Boone peered over her shoulder and let out a low sound that was not quite a word. Walt stood back with his hands on his belt, as if steadying the ground. Elena looked at the pulley, then at the trees, then at the water moving beyond them, always on schedule. She lifted the little wheel high so the others could see, the blue smear bright in the fading light. "This isn't trail," she said. "It's logistics." Elena and Walt laid the finds out again, this time with coffee and quiet. The little pulley sat like a coin no one would spend. The bracelet lay in a curve, its leather dark from wear, its knot steady, the beads amber, black, amber repeating. In a rhythm that meant more than pretty. "Show me how you'd read it," Elena said. Walt rubbed the scar where 2 fingers should have been and smiled like a teacher who likes his subject. "You can name knots like words or count them like steps. Clove, clove, figure 8, that's one kind of sentence. Beads can mark direction. Some folks used to teach beginners to leave breadcrumbs with rope." He pointed. "See how this run splits? 3 repeats, short space, then a different hitch." Elena leaned closer. 3, pause, and then the figure 8 framed with a bead. 3 up, 1 down, Walt said. Or 3 goes, 1 return. Could be altitude, trees, pulls on a line. But this, he tapped the beads themselves, is letters if you want them to be. People make alphabets of what their hands know. B for bite, U for under, E for 8, I for inside, R for round, O for over. He laughed at his own luck. Culvert. It's what we call the pipe under a road when we're patching runoff. Elena felt the little thrum in the chest. That comes when a door opens. Cutter, she repeated. And the numbers on the matchbook 3 of something. The arrow and NNE give a bearing. And the cover? She tapped the lantern, drawing "Blue lantern." "Culvert 14, Walt said, as if the number had always been there. He flipped the bracelet to another tiny change in pattern. Lantern. 3 marks. And a direction that points you from the river to the road. Boone came in with 2 donuts and a fresh welt on his neck. "Your favorite insect send its regards," he said, tossing a napkin to Elena and setting the box far from his own. "Reach." He listened, chewed, and nodded. "Culvert 14 runs under the L portal, near a turnout people use even though the sign tells them not to." He checked the window. "Clouds building. If we're going, we go before the creek remembers. It's strong." They went. The sky grayed up fast, the kind of mountain mood that goes from friendly to busy in the time it takes to lace a boot. By the time they parked at the unofficial turnout, the air was wet enough to slick hair. The mouth of the culvert wore a grill of rock and branches thrown there by season after season of water doing its work. Elena shrugged into a light harness and clipped a line to the belt in calm. Practiced motions. Boone fed out bright tape, the kind printed with warning words, and tied it off to the bumper. "Not rated for heroics," he said, "but rated for me not watching you float to Merst." Walt crouched with a hand on the line. "If she hollers, we pull steady, not brave." Elena went to her knees and slid in. The pipe was wider than she feared and lower than she liked. Cold water hurried along the bottom, brown with leaf bits and grit. Her shoulders brushed the curve. She breathed slow and kept her weight high. The first 10 feet were only a crawl in a damp whispering drum. Then the floor dipped and the water made its opinion known. It pushed at her shins and then her hips. She clenched teeth she did not remember clenching and dug her palms along the rough concrete lip where water had eaten a channel. "Half," she called back, the sound smaller than she meant. "Copy," Boone called, voice careful and bright. Little surge came, the kind that feels playful until you remember scale. It slid her forward in a smooth, awful way. Her knee banged the wall. The tape on her belt tugged. She grabbed for anything and found a broken bolt head and the edge of a ledge built into the side. Maybe a shelf of silt and old trash that had settled into usefulness. She hauled herself onto it with a grunt that tasted like rust. She let her eyes adjust and her heart stepped down 2 stairs. The headlamp showed a streak of black on the concrete at shoulder height, a soot kiss where someone had lit flame after flame in a place where flame did not belong. Below the mark lay a crust of ash that had clung where current could not take it. Scattered on the shelf were the soft, tired bodies of matchsticks, their red tips burned to gray. The paper heads were gone, but the wood smelled faintly like the Chun motel lobby in summer cheap smoke and something sweet under it. She took 3 in her gloved hand and slid them into a bag. The ash went in another. She touched the soot line and rubbed her glove. A thin dark came away mixed with the tiniest smear of something that gleamed blue when the light hit it right. "Found something," she said, and the pipe took her voice and rolled it back. When she moved again, the water decided it wanted her after all. It shoved her sideways and her boot lost the bottom. The tape on her belt went tight. For a half second she rode the slide in a dumb, clean way, thinking only of the way cold writes itself through a jacket. Then the line yanked, firm and sure. And she and the culvert disagreed about direction. Outside, Boone had set his heels as if the valley could borrow them. Walt leaned on the bumper, legs set wide. The tape stretched and sang. "You with me?" Boone called, "With you, Elena." Sighed, coughing. More water than words in her mouth. They pulled steady, and steady turned into progress. Elena let the pipe give back what it had tried to take and rode the slow skid to where daylight turned the circle ahead a softer gray. She came out on her elbows like a person crawling from a story. Boone grabbed her jacket and laughed once from the relief that comes out wrong. The rain made a new curtain around them. "Not rated for heroics," he said again, staring at the tape as if it were a diploma. She handed him the bag with the matchsticks. "Blue Lantern," he said, the words low. Walt peered and touched the ash with 2 careful fingers, then rubbed his ungloved hand along the concrete lip and brought away, a ghost of the same blue that had stained Elena's glove. They waited in the truck until the rain lost its edge. Steam lifted off the road in thin, tired threads. Boone sneezed and again, and glared at the sky as if it had sent the bee by airmail. The motel sat like a memory that had locked its doors. The Blue Lantern sign still hung, paint peeled. The lantern graphic flaked, but trying. The office windows were dust thick enough to write in. Boone found the contact number on a taped notice. The owner, tired and kind, gave permission to poo. Look so long as nothing broke that was already broken. Inside, the air was old carpet and lemon oil that had lost its time. A bell on the counter had a note that rang for no one. Elena moved slow, not out of fear of ghosts, but respect for the way buildings keep stories in corners. In the lobby ceiling, over a spot where the floor had fewer footprints, 4 little craters showed where heavy screws had once lived. The spacing looked like the bracket of a mount, not a random fix. At the edge of the office window, where someone had leaned out and in, a thin line of grease had worked itself into the grain of the wood. Elena touched it with the tip of her glove and the blue came back like an old bruise. Boone thumbed through a guest ledger, the kind with dates that never learned how to leave. Amid names, rates, and tidy notes, small drawings of a lantern marked some nights. Next to the drawing, in quick pencil, someone had written maintenance. On 3 of those marks, a Ramang 3 sat like a private grin. Maintenance at night. Boone said, 3 of them, NNE from the creek. Pulley holes, Elena said, pointing up. Grease on the way out. Something hung, something hauled. They took photos for the file. The bell rang once when Boone set the ledger down too fast, and the sound made him apologize to an empty room. Elena wanted another ear. They drove to the community hall where Eloise Naaman helped run language classes and kept a table of newspapers that told who had been born and who had been buried. Eloise listened without interrupting, her chin in her hand, eyes moving at each mention: the bracelet, the beads, the knots, the matchbook, the soot, the grease. "You're not wrong to read." "Hands," Eloise said at last. "When we used to guide nights for visitors' owls, stars, we taught them to count with what they carried. Beads, not steps. 3 up, 1 down is how we keep people from walking off into forever. It means you climb 3 markers trees, posts, rises, and then you come down 1 to check your sense. It is a braid in space so you don't lose your own end." She touched the bracelet. "This is that. And it's also letters if you're clever and lonely and need to hide a map where only people with rope will see it." Elena placed the brochure and 1 shenotype on the table. Eloise did not need long. She traced from the river toward the road with her finger. 3 rises from Vernal puts you not at the motel, but close. If you follow this way and honor the downstep, you wind up at Forsta. She tapped the word on a small index map. "Up there, fire teaches what the ground forgot to say." "There's a burn plant, isn't there?" "There is," Walt said. "They flagged it last month. Fire clears noise," Eloise said. "It shows the old bones, charcoal, iron, holes. It is a hard teacher and a fair one." Greta Salazar met them on the porch, drawn by word through friends faster than phones. She smelled faintly of cedar and smiled as if the day were a polite guest. "I heard you're asking about old walks," she said. "I ran the owl nights back then. We never left trails. I was at the school the weekend you're thinking of, selling pies." She tilted her head toward a bulletin board with fundraiser. Posters yellowed by sun. "Do you remember any nights at the Blue Lantern?" Elena asked. "Just the coffee after," Greta said. "It was the only place that stayed open for us. I can't even tell you how many times we warmed up there." She laughed softly. "You know how cold patience gets." Rory Pike leaned in the doorway. arms crossed over a shirt with a company logo that said he liked his tools alphabetized. "I'm just a supplier," he said by way of greeting. "If rope goes somewhere, I bill it. Ask maintenance. I don't hang things. I sell the things people use to hang things." Evan Morales came at evening, thin with years and carrying the heaviness of a story he had told only to himself. June. "Loved walking alone," he said. "I loved her and hated that about her. We fought once about it outside the coffee cart. Walt told us to keep voices down around birds. We kept voices down and kept the fight." He swallowed. "If you think I hurt her, say it now. I'll still help you look." Elena wrote no judgment in her face. She thanked each for their time and words, even the words that felt like carefully wrapped gifts with little inside. Outside, the wind changed. It came from higher up Dryer with the smell of pine bark that had seen too many summers. Elena could feel the map in her legs now, river to road, rises to downstep, lantern to lane. Forster waited where the land held old structures like teeth. Under gums, they drove until the trees thinned and the sky opened in a way that let weather think about wide ideas. A wooden sign stood at a junction where a dirt spur met a paved line. Someone had brushed fresh paint on it last week. The letters were clean and sure. Elena stepped out and the wind tugged at her jacket. She rested a hand on the sign's post and noticed how the blue smear on her glove had gathered dust all day. A faint dark thumbprint of someone else's plan riding with her. Walt read it, then looked at the high country as if the pines could nod back. "People make people disappear," he said, the old lines at his eyes tightening. "The woods only keep the secret." Elena turned the bracelet in her fingers, feeling each knot like a syllable. The blue smear on her glove had picked up dust, a faint bruise that refused to wash out with rain. "Then we ask the woods to talk," she said, "and we bring a translator that speaks fire." Before the burn, there was work. Elena carried the banded owl feather to the small office where the biologist kept files on paper and in his head. Dr. Leland Cho bent to the metal band, a magnifier on his nose. Breath held the way careful people hold it when they read numbers that matter. Hour. "Issue bands from the 80s start with a 7, he said. "This begins with 5-4. Doesn't match any of our blocks. Not state, not federal. What else uses bands like this?" Elena asked. "Rescues, rehab centers, citizen groups, some legit, some not. In the old days, a few volunteers bought cheap blanks through catalogs. They wanted to feel official." He glanced up. "You know who ran night walks then?" "Greta," Elena said. He shrugged. "She loves birds. That's not a crime. Tagging wild ones without permits is." They pulled a cardboard archive box from a shelf that sighed. Inside lay hand-drawn maps and attendance sheets from owl nights, names in different pens. Greta's, writing neat and round, a small star by each date with "bring extra scarves" in the margins. On 3 spring nights, instead of a star, a lantern was sketched. The same lantern shape as the motel matchbook, beams like a trident. Dr. Cho blinked. "At it. Cute," he said. "Or something else." Elena thanked him and drove to the school that had hosted bake sales and fairs since June was a teenager. The bulletin board outside the office kept ghosts the way some people keep keys by habit. A flyer for the fundraiser Greta had claimed showed names of kitchen volunteers. Greta's wasn't there. A sign-in sheet from that weekend listed 10 people. Greta again was not among them. "She dropped by with pies," the secretary said. "I don't remember her staying." At the Blue Lantern, the dusty ledger gave a different kind of memory. On a night with a lantern doodle, the bill scribbles showed coffee for 5 and owl group on a tab. On another, a line read, "hot water plus towels." Then a little 3 where the total should be. And an initial that looked like a G. Greta's perfume of cedar lingered in Elena's mind. Not in the room. Boone, who had been asked to follow. A thin strand of webbing lodged behind a shelf, pushed too hard. A prickle of blue ran along the grain. He reached the shelf, protested, and the whole unit shuddered before spilling its old cough into the room. Nails in a coffee can, a box of wax paper, a stack of clean rags that had forgotten how. Boone did a hasty two-step to save his toe, and failed. A small hammer knocked itself off and landed on his boot with the comic authority of a dropped book. "I meant to do that," he said to no one, then to Elena, who had turned with an expression halfway between concern and amusement. "The tape led me here," he added, holding up the frayed webbing like an apology. The blue stain on its edge winked in the weak light. She kept her face kind. "It did its job," she said. "They invited Rory Pike to the station, not as a suspect," he told himself, but as a person who sold rope the way other people sold bread. He came in with a coin already between his fingers. The thing spun over his knuckles like it belonged there. A small planet in a tired orbit. "We're missing invoices," Elena said. "We asked maintenance for the purchase orders on pulleys. And webbing. They have holes. You supplied a case of blue grease to someone cash, not on account." Rory smiled without teeth. "You want the truth?" he said. "Sometimes a guy pays cash for something the county runs out of, and he wants it quick. Maybe he's got a fence to fix. Maybe he's got a scout troop learning knots. Not my business. Scout troops don't grease their fingers blue," Boone said, leaning back far enough to make his chair consider the floor and then think better of it. "That color is for cold conditions," Elena said. "Holds better on metal. Where would a fence need that?" Rory looked at the coin as if it could answer. It spun once more and clicked against his ring. "I bill what I sell," he said. "What people do with it is their own rope." When he left, the coin was gone, and the smell of machine oil stayed behind longer than his charm. The day of the burn came with briefings and maps laid flat by rock mugs. The burn boss spoke in even rhythms. Lines here, breaks here, smoke columns within. Limits. Crews in yellow shirts and hard hats checked radios and dripped torches. Walt shook hands with old colleagues and listened to the wind the way men who worked with fire learned to listen. Eloise arrived with a small group from the community, there to watch and count and make sure old places were respected. She nodded. To Elena, "Fire polite," she said, then true. They walked the perimeter before any flame touched grass. Walt led Elena along an old shortcut, a thin seam of path that knew where to go even if feet had not used it for years. When this was still ours to patrol on foot, he said, we marked long routes quiet so we could find them without trail signs. He stopped at a cedar where time had healed most wounds and left the rest as lessons. 3 scars in the bark, low and close, made a shallow trident. "Marks of an air route," he said. "You don't scratch those for nothing." Elena pressed her palm to the trunk and felt a cold that was not weather but age. "They use this to aim," she said. Tree to tree, light to light. Smoke began in thin threads, then rose in small columns that stitched sky to earth. The line held. Drip torches traced slow commas along the ground. A hush came, not silence, but that working quiet where everyone knows the job and does it. The fire licked and cleaned, hungry but polite, as Eloise had hoped. And then it did what fire does after it has been polite long enough. It found a pocket of duff and a log hollowed by insects and made a low voice out of it. It leaned into old wood. It breathed at something below that had waited for exactly this teacher. The ground gave a small sigh. A rectangle of earth slumped, and under it a dark lung exhaled air that had not seen day in a very long time. "Hold that edge," the burn boss called, calm but alert. The crew adjusted, water hissing where flame thought to wander. Elena and Walt moved in once the heat eased and the ash lay like new skin. The hole was not large. A person would have to fold to slip in. Around its lip, wood char told a second story. Long ago, something heavy had rubbed a circle there again and again. Elena lifted her light to the low ceiling just inside. In that stony lid, shallow grooves formed rings, each the width of a pulley. Wheel, each placed where a person with a plan would place them. On a rock near the entry lay a scrap of flat webbing fused to the stone by time and heat, its edge still wearing a smear of stubborn blue. Walt crouched and ran his finger along a groove. He nodded once. "Anchors," he said. Boone arrived behind them, rubbing at a new sting as if the bee had followed him through smoke. "You folks always find doors where I see walls," he said, because he needed to say something not about the air that came out of the ground, cold and old. Eloise stood a little back, her hand over her mouth, eyes steady. "Fire tells the ground to speak," she said softly. It just did. Elena uncoiled a length of cord without thinking about it. The habit felt like June's handwriting, simple, practical, sure. She checked the edges, tested the first few feet inside with a boot, and then lifted her light toward the throat of the place. The beam reached in, touching stone, and a suggestion of rails bolted into something farther on. Air moved past her. Faced with the flavor of iron and long-closed water, she raised the light higher, and the dark took a step back. They stepped into the opening as if entering a held breath. Air moved out slow and old. Dust lifted with their boots. Water ticked from stone like a clock that couldn't count past one. Elena led, light low. Walt came behind, palm on the wall. Boone brought the last coil of cord in the bee welt that made him mutter. Inside, the world narrowed to tunnel and drip. Rails rusted to brown bones ran a few yards and vanished under a slump of rock and soil. The ceiling wore shallow rings where metal had turned again and again. The floor told a slower story, fine grit like flour, then scuffs, then two shallow lines, as if something heavy had been dragged by careful hands. Elena crouched where the lines bent toward a fallen wall. At the base of a support post, a thread of leather clung to a splinter, dried and curled but braided. She pinched it free, laid it on her palm, and held still. "Bracelet," she said. Walt nodded once. They put ears to wood and heard more than silence. Beneath the dead thud of timber was a different sound, a soft rush that didn't belong here. Elena took off a glove and set her fingertips to the wall. A tremor answered, faint as a cat purr through a door. "Water," she said. Cascade Creek on the far side. Near the drag marks, a beam still wore someone's handwriting. Letters, cut with a sharp point, had filled with soot. Elena brushed them with the back of a knuckle and read, "I raised my backpack. If anyone sees it, follow the sound of the water." J. Boone whispered, "For all," the word from Eloise's class. Elena pictured June in this same gloom, fingers raw, working by feel and stubborn hope. She saw the pulley at the rail, the webbing, the cord. She traced the path in the air, cord up through a wheel, out to a branch, back through the wheel, pack lifted by patience, not strength. She saw June slip hand warmers into the top of the pack so it would stay warm a while, a trick from cold mornings. They marked the inscription, then backed out to call Linda before the day turned. She met them at the swinging bridge, both hands tied on the rail. The river ran bright under her. Elena spoke plain. "We found proof she was alive in there. A piece of her bracelet. Her words. Linda didn't cry at first. She lifted her chin as if rain had begun, and she wanted more of it, not less. She left a message," she said, and then the tears came from a room she had kept locked for years. Walt stood at her shoulder. Boone looked at the water as if it had asked a question. When Linda steadied, Elena set the leather thread in her palm. Linda folded her fingers over it like a small, bright bird. Back at the opening, they mapped the wall with hands and sound. Elena tapped with the handle of her knife in a slow grid. Walt hummed low to feel where the note traveled. Boone held his breath. Behind the collapse, the tremor of moving water never stopped. "She was right," Elena said. "There's a passage sealed by a slide. If we open it wrong, the ceiling comes down. If we open it right, a door back to her." They took the plan to the burn boss and the rescue crew. A small team could work the face with care. peel what gravity allowed, shore what needed help. It would take time and no room for pride. They were lining up the first cuts when footsteps scraped at the edge of the light. Rory. Pike stepped into view with a pistol low at his side and a smile that didn't fit his face. His shirt was clean. His eyes were not. "That's close enough," he said. "Drop your toys." Boone lifted both hands. "You're late to the party, Rory," he said. "Fire already told on you." Rory's gaze flicked to the groove marks and back. "Fire tells on everyone eventually," he said. "I'm here to clean up." Elena kept her voice level. "Clean up what?" "A mess from kids who thought secret work made them special." He moved the pistol a shade, not enough to aim, just enough to remind. "We ran lines in the canopy. Night air is good for quiet jobs. A pulley here, webbing there. Owl walks kept the do-gooders busy. Meanwhile, boxes flew tree to tree, staging. Here, burl's worth more than a pickup. Solvents for folks who don't like rules. Old things from cabins no one misses until they're gone." He shrugged. "You can make a living in the dock if you keep the lights off." "And June?" Walt asked, voice sand-flat. Rory watched the floor. Greta said the girl kept taking notes and asking the wrong people the right questions. "We wanted to scare her. Lock her, let her sweat, bring her out with a story about getting lost." He licked his lips. "Then the wall went. We told ourselves we'd come back with shovels. But a roadblock went up. Someone panicked. Weeks turned. It's hard to go back to a room you made into a grave." The words hung like smoke that would not rise. Elena felt heat in her chest that was not from fire. "You left her," she said. Rory's mouth twitched. "I'm here now," he said, as if that fixed a sum. He patted his jacket pocket. "And I'm going to seal this mouth for good. Fewer questions when a place is a memory." Boone shifted his weight, careful, reading angles and the distance to Rory's wrist. Walt didn't move. Elena heard the creak through the wall and June's sentence in her head. She took half a step so her body blocked the narrowest part of the door. "Don't," she said. "Whatever you're holding, don't." Rory brought out a small yellow box, nicked and dirty, with a rubber antenna cracked. "Old trick," he said. "One charge left from better days. Buried where we used to park crates so bears wouldn't nose around. This dirt is tired of its shape. Watch it change." He thumbed a switch. At first, nothing happened. The tiny pause was worse than a shout. Then the ground far under them punched up a dull sound, and dust leaped from the beam like breath. Pebbles ticked down the wall. The light swung in Elena's hand and rode a shaky arc across old wood. Rory backed a step, the pistol now up, eyes wide as if he'd surprised himself. "Out!" Boone shouted, moving toward Elena. Walt grabbed for Rory's wrist. The pistol went off once into the dirt with a flat smack. The yellow box in Rory's other hand chirped, small and wrong. A second thud rolled through the floor, closer, and the beam above answered with a long groan. Like a barn door in a wind you should have read earlier. Elena shoved Boone toward the safer wall. The post at their backs shivered. Dust filled mouths and eyes. Someone swore. Someone prayed. Someone said June's name without meaning to. The column nearest the collapse bowed as if remembering a task, and then forgot how to stand. It let go with a crack like a tree splitting in winter. The world tilted. The floor bucked. Elena felt the ground leave her feet. Boone's hand flashed and then was gone, thrown the other way by moving earth. The light tore from her grip and spun, riding one wild circle before it hit stone and went out. The mind took a breath inward and the dark closed its teeth. Grit bit her tongue. Nothing. The dark clenched and then loosened enough to breathe. Dust hung in the air like flour. Elena felt for the wall, found a post that was still behaving, and made her hands do what her head told them even while the ground grumbled. She pulled a coil of slackline from her pack pocket, looped it twice around the pillar, cinched it with a simple anchor. and tossed the free end across the gap where the floor had dropped away. The tape bit into her palms and told her it would hold if she trusted it without asking for beauty. Boone? She called present. He coughed from the other side, voice sanded down. Also dusty, also extremely unhappy. Rory tried too. Scrambled past him in the confusion, pistol skittering toward the shadows. Boone moved on instinct. He caught Rory by the jacket collar with both hands and sat down hard, using his weight like a brake. He sneezed, cursed, sneezed again, and refused to let go. "Congratulations," he wheezed in Rory's ear. "You are under arrest and covered." "In mine." Elena fed the tape through her belt to make a poor man's tether and inched along the lip, boots edging, shoulder close to stone. She found Boone's outstretched arm, then Rory's ankle. Walt, steady even when the earth forgot how, crawled in behind her and tied a backup loop around a chunk of timber that still believed in its job. The ground muttered once more, a warning rather than a sentence. Outside, the crew that had been staging for careful work heard the thuds and came running with shoring and the soft authority of people who know how to talk to dangerous rooms. They slid wedges into place, cribbed the worst of the sag, and made the air a little safer. One of them handed Elena a spare headlamp. Light came back to the world in a cautious circle. Bootsteps slapped the slope. Greta Salazar appeared at the edge of the smoke, hair pinned under a knit cap, face calm in a way that had always read as kindness. She looked at the hole, the tape, the men with braces in their hands, and then at the path no one used unless they meant to. She turned as if she had simply remembered soup on a stove and met Eloise Naiman instead. "Evening," Eloise said, and the word was a gate. Behind her stood 2 environmental officers called in for the burn, vests bright, expressions level. Greta smiled too quickly. "I came to help," she said. "You came to see if old things stayed buried," Eloise answered. "Stay." Inside, Rory stopped struggling. Dust had made paste at the edge of his hair. He looked smaller. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he said, as if that softened any edge. "We just wanted her to shut up for a night. Show her the dark can be loud. We were going to let her out at dawn." The slope let go. We told ourselves we'd dig after the weekend, when people were done with their pies and lanterns. He swallowed. But a ranger parked wrong. Patrols changed. Boulders moved. Every hour made it harder. "You went home," Walt said, flat as a plague. "We went home," Rory said, and for the first time his voice had the shape of a thing he was afraid of. "Every night I didn't sleep. I told myself she'd gotten out some other way and was just mean enough not to tell." He met Elena's eyes. "You know that's a lie. I know it's a lie." They cuffed him and sat him where the wall could see his face. Outside, Greta took one step into the brush and found 2 vests and Eloise's look. "No," Eloise said, and it was not loud, but it had weight. Greta lifted her hands, palms soft, cedar on her sleeves. She had nothing to say that did not end up being less than the wind. The rescue crew carefully stabilized the space before starting to open the blocked area. Working slowly with small tools, they removed what was safe and supported the rest. Elena tapped and listened for changes in the wood. Walt hummed softly to sense vibrations in the beams, and Boone, still dealing with a persistent bee, held the light and passed supply bags, adding quiet humor to balance the heavy atmosphere. As they cleared the last barrier, the sound of running water grew stronger. A final board came away, releasing a cool breath of air that smelled of iron and decayed leaves. Elena entered first, her flashlight tracing the narrow space until it widened just enough to reveal what they had feared: skeletal remains, a weather-worn jacket, a broken watch frozen at no discernible hour, and a small cloth bag tied with a perfect knot. Inside, she found a carefully preserved blue sunprint of a lantern with 3 rays, a coded symbol that had guided the entire investigation. They documented everything and called Linda, who arrived pale and quiet. Seeing the watch and the print confirmed what her heart had known for years. She touched the Shinotype as if checking for a heartbeat and whispered, "She told me to look up." I should have asked how high. With Rory and Greta taken into custody, evidence was catalogued and charges filed. Weeks later, a memorial bench with June's name was placed at Swinging Bridge. Linda received June's reconstructed bracelet, and Elena kept a small corner of the final Shinotype as a reminder. At the dedication, friends, rangers, and townspeople gathered. Walt offered a nod of respect, Boone showed up with his trademark humor, and Eloise sang softly about how a river learns its banks. Elena summed it up simply, "Knot by knot, she guided us. We only needed to learn to look up." Now, anyone sitting on that bench can hear Cascade Creek and look toward the tall pine that once hid a secret, its branches swaying high above the old beacon watching over the valley.